But why Zoroastrianism is the origin of universal human rights is because it's a religion that says we should have different religions for different purposes. That's why I have Mithraism as a military cult. And you separate that from Zurvanism as a priestly cult, because you must, in Zoroastrianism, always separate the priest from the chieftain. That's exactly why the birth of democracy is a separation of the phallus. The priest, the Mobed and Mobed, has his own court, his own capital. The Shah and Shah, the king of the kings, has his own capital, his own court. They must never meet. They must never be part of the same system. And by separating the phallus, you can also then separate on different levels. So this is, of course, where Deleuze's philosophy of difference and repetition starts. What you then have when you separate the phallus, you separate priest and you separate a chieftain from each other, is that you can then separate other things too. You can, for example, allow a matriarchy to prosper, where older women guide younger women towards what it means to be a woman. Then you have basically the American Constitution. It consists of exactly those three roles. It has a president supposed to be chieftain. It has a Congress supposed to be the priest because they dictate the law. And then you have somebody holding the other two guys responsible for shaping up and delivering. And it's called the Supreme Court. It's a Persian structure that the French brought to America, and it's genius. That's how you build a strong society. So I would say that's where it starts. But then you can also have a folk religion. You can have an elite religion, which is like, okay, we're going to mysticism and we're going to deep studies, and it's going to take you 50 years to understand how the world actually operates. And then you get ideas like Zoroastrianism, you get ideas like Zoroastrianism. But below that, you can have a folk religion. And that's what in Catholicism is called saints. And this is what's called the lesser gods in Hinduism. Nobody with the same mind goes and worships God as an abstract concept. No, you go and worship Madonna if you're gay, whatever. You go and worship Michael Jackson if you're a pedophile. And you go worship Elvis Presley if you're just a regular American guy, right? So you go and worship these gods and you talk to them, and they can then talk to God. And this worship of lesser gods is actually quite beautiful, and that's called polytheism. But it exists in any decent religion. The problem with Protestantism was that it tried to remove these lesser gods so that I can sit and read a book alone called the Bible, and I could then talk directly to God. And that is, of course, the beginning of Instagram. It's like when everybody else hates me and thinks I'm crap and I'm not interesting at all, at least God will give me a like.
Well, they also
is the promise you get in Protestant churches, like God loves you no matter what. No, he doesn't. He's bored with you like everybody else. He will fuck you, right? And this is exactly the problem we have with culture today.
Well,
we need the lesser gods back in.
In Islam, they did have, I remember Giorgiani wrote about this crazy guy who was like the village, I don't know what you would call it, just like the village crazy man, who was supposed to have like a special relationship with God, where because the dude was so crazy, God was actually making him crazy and saving him for himself, because he's crazy, but he's special. You know, like he has certain...
but that's not why he's crazy. The crazy man is crazy because then you can't mimic him. Because the problem with humanity, read René Girard, the problem with humanity is that we mimic all the time. Children mimic grown-ups, that's okay. But grown-ups also mimic other grown-ups. And because they have mimetic desires and they mimic even their desires, they eventually get, you get so much tension in society, you need to find a fucking scapegoat and get out of the problem. And this is what happens constantly in history. That's exactly how lynch mobs today. But digital lynch mobs today. And they're frustrated because they're under pressure, because they're very unhappy with their lives and they fail at what they do. And that's why they go after somebody else to deplatform them and cancel them. That's exactly what's happening today. When we're all told when the internet arrived, we were all going to be stars. We're all going to have 60 million followers. Every one of us is going to be that important and interesting. And at the end of the day, no, we only have a limited amount of time we're awake every day. And when we're awake, we then have to be online all the time, which Facebook thought we would be. And then we would all follow each other. No, we don't. We follow a few people that are actually interesting and provide some quality of some kind. So there are only a few winners in the internet world after all. And all these disappointed people with their Instagram accounts today who never became stars, who failed at the auditions and nobody cared because they just mimicked others. This is what we've ended up today. And that's exactly when people realize that the internet is not going to be my stage either. Everybody's on the stage. There's no audience left. It's a lack of audience that's dominant in the world today. And that's exactly why we get the lynch mobs. So to get out of that, you need, if you're going to be in any way decently spiritual, you need to have a crazy wisdom teacher, a crazy guy who you cannot mimic. He's such a fool. And what he does is such horrible and horrendous. But you can learn from him. And that's the only pure knowledge when you learn from somebody without mimicking. That's called Tantra in the East.
Very interesting.
And that's why the shaman is always crazy. He behaves as if he's crazy, even if he isn't. So the point here is that the shaman cannot be copied. And because you cannot mimic him, you have to make up your own mind and find your own way in life.
And those would also be the artists in the periphery, where I've always just seen that, let's say today, I mean, we have a Gay Pride month in Manhattan, for instance, and everything's become, at the same time, sanitized, but also all of this S&M
The
stuff
gays
in the
have
air.
left. The gays have left. They're not in the parade any longer. It doesn't speak volumes. It's like we have a shamanic parade, but the shamans left. Okay. The point here is that I talk about the shamanic cast with Söderqvist in our books all the time. We celebrate it. And that's why Thaddeus Russell and I are spirits, you know, the same spirit, kindred spirits. He is always defending the renegades. He wrote this amazing book called The Renegade History of the United States. And it's actually the best and most proper and honest history book on America ever. So what we're saying is that the shamans go forward and they're crazy and all that, but they're the only ones that do something genuinely original. That's why art belongs with the shamans, because they do original stuff. The rest of us are just mimickers.
So first of all, we got Vers here, and my buddy Dan is in the waiting room. He's waiting to get let in right now. And I just want to say, so you said people that worship pedophiles like Michael Jackson. Is that why the Safdie brothers put Michael Jackson in a cross and Uncut Gems? Is it like a big?
It's going to be interesting. It's going to be
like
interesting. It's going to be interesting. We finally have the Michael Jackson Renaissance, because the Michael Jackson Renaissance is we're going to be forced to revalue our values.
Michael Jackson was wrongfully accused. Michael Jackson never did anything wrong. Michael Jackson never did anything wrong.
No, I mean, I'm not a moralist. So I don't think anybody does anything wrong.
Nobody's being a moralist here. Yeah. What I thought when you brought up Tantra, I thought that was really pertinent, because in my readings of Tantra and like the tradition, I've noticed that the model often given for Tantric tradition in general is that there's two rivers that flow into that, and one is clerical and one is shamanic. And it's extremely pertinent to also like the neurotic versus the psychotic, this like split model of how different types of people work. And I think that it connects really nicely with what you've been talking about, because it's the same thing. It's this idea where you have larger societies, or like the more orthodox structure of society, and one person says, read this book, and then everyone reads this book, versus like the more organic, charismatic basis for spirituality that cannot be imitated, cannot be replicated. And that's why the internet right now is an extremely shamanic space. Like you see new holy men arising every day.
Mm-hmm.
It's a golden age.
Where the fuck did you come from, Sophia? That's
from
brilliant.
The internet.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you're great. You're the next holy woman then in that case, or whatever holy gender you want to be. But yeah, you're brilliant. No, that's absolutely correct. What I do in my work, and this is exactly my work through the 4 Middle Eastern religions, because the problem with Islam and Christianity is that they removed something that I call the Bard Absolute. It's nothing to do with me. It's not B-A-R-D. It's B-A-R-R-E-D. So it's like Bard. It's barred from us. It's closed from us. We can't have access to it. And the idea with the Bard Absolute is that we go and pray to the lesser gods, and this is called Sutra. And this is like how the world works. So you're going to run village life, and you're going to run it properly and fairly. You teach Sutra. But then if you want to go beyond that, to the Zoroastrian world, you cross the Shinavad bridge. You go into the realm of the dead and the not yet born. What they meant with that is you go into a realm that most people will not go to. And you have to have a certain personality type to have access to it. And you have to study first before you're ready for it.
That is only accessible to a special caste.
Exactly. So it's Tantra. This is the Bard. And I want to reintroduce the Bard Absolute, which Zoroastrianism and Judaism saved. It's impossible for a Jew or for a Zoroastrian to talk directly to God. You talk to the priest, and the priest then talk to God on your behalf. And for most people, that's how most people operate. But the idea in Protestantism, you have direct access to God, or the idea in, say, Islamism, for example, that God has direct access to you, which is just as ridiculous. There has to be something in between, because there has to be, for us, a possibility to be children before we become grown-ups. And when we're grown-ups, we have masters, and we learn from the masters how to do, for example, professions. And that's how most human activities should be. That's called Sutra. But to go into the Tantric realm is only for some people to do. And they usually have to be incredibly independent, because they probably had to go out somewhere in the forest, in the woods, and be out there on their own with a few other outcasts, weirdos. And that's where they go. And then when you look, say, Thaddeus Russell's description of America, and you look at the urban environment, it's always in the harbors where you find the red light districts, where all the hustlers go. That's where you find the shamanic caste people, or his renegades. That's where you find
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah.
They will always look for that realm. And that's exactly what the internet is dominated by mass behavior, mimicking and all that. That's the vast majority of it. But for us, we just look for these other weirdos out there, and we finally find them. And this is what I call the digital shamans. I think, or the digital priesthood. The shamanic caste will now reunite because of the internet on a global scale, hopefully through English as their shared language. And they will then exchange their information with each other. And they go into the mythic realm and do these crazy shit guys that Lev and Jules are hooked on, like most guys their generation are. It's called mythos. And we'll then also rediscover logos, which is like the ultimate reality, which is, of course, the proper mystical journey. That's not into fairy tales, but actually the opposite direction towards logos. Like, what is the ultimate reality? What is it like? And can I have access to it? And am I prepared to live with it no matter what if I'm approached by it?
Well, at that point, it's too late. Either you live with it or you're destroyed by it.
Well, you can just have the psyche to survive it.
Yes.
But you probably...
But that is only granted to a specific group.
Yes, and you probably have to live with the acknowledgement that I wish I'd never experienced it. I was a bit too curious, but still I did. And I'm proud of the fact that I did. And I'm proud of the archetype that I represent, that I did that. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to be a priest and sit and listen to confessions all day long, you better have lived a full life. You better understand the richness of life and the horrors of it. Because otherwise, nobody will believe you when you sit there. But when they realize you're empathic towards the others, not empathic in a sentimental sense, but empathic is like, yeah, I get where you're at. I haven't been there for 12 years like you and lived that kind of hell, but I've been there. I've taken a drug. I had a bad trip, and I was there for 8 hours, and I wanted to kill myself too. So I have some kind of gnosis, some kind of knowledge of where you're at, and that's exactly why I can empathize with you.
You know, it's interesting you guys talk about this, and I know it's Sophia, is it?
Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
You mentioned something special about religion that gives them their power, and that made me think of a book I'm reading by William James called The Varieties of Religious Experience, where he kind of posits that it's the individual religious experience and deep sense of clarity that sort of makes people by and large religious, or listen to people who have had similar experiences. And he has this amazing catalog of different people, some who I can recognize, like say St. Augustine or St. Aquinas, stuff like that. But I think that's an interesting thing to consider, because there's so much to be said. Like, is it actually a religious experience? Am I being touched by God, or is it something more like a mania? Or are these shamans under the influence, or are they actually being touched? And in any case, I think what he basically says is that it doesn't really matter, because it still enforces a change in the individual. And I think that's what a lot of religion is about like creating change in the individual. If you led a life of debauchery or whatever, drinking all the time, and then one day one particular passage from the Bible flashes in.
I would stop you there, because I think you're mistaking one thing for the other. It's absolutely religious experience. This is a shamanic religious experience we're talking about here. I think Sophia would agree with me. And that's where you did psychedelics. That was the original religion as a practice on your own. But that's how shamans practice religion.
I'm not discounting that.
Yeah, but the change in your character through religious experience is not part of that at all. That's too Christian. That arises way later when you have a controlled society.
It is about, the book is mainly involved in Christianity.
If you read Rudolf Otto later in the 1910s, that's Heilige. That book kickstarted 20th century anthropology, which is a fantastic area. That's where guys like Jordan Peterson, Camille Pagge come out of that scene too. But that's much later. Out of Rudolf Otto came Mircea Eliade, and he wrote a book called Shamanism in the 1950s. And while we talk about shamanism today, we talk about the shamanic caste and shamans as people who go and pursue their religious experience in the forest or in the deserts. It's because of Mircea Eliade. And he essentially says that this is also the original religious experience. But religion is then also the organization of society as a whole. And religion then, to me, is ultimately how the elders of society control the youth and then get them into what they should do. If you say you go to Cameroon in Africa and you witness an Iboga ceremony, which is like 3 days of hell and eventually heaven, and you get your ego knocked out to have your ego serve the community, which you do basically with young brats. You put them through the Iboga ceremony. That's how we use it today to get rid of the opiate addiction, because that's also a narcissistic problem. So you knock the narcissism out and finally have a person ready to serve the community, which is the point for a young man, for example. And that's why these strong psychedelic experiences are then brought into the community, but they're brought in by the elders who lovingly teach the young to serve the community and not serve their own egos. And that is where it touches the event that changes you forever. But for the shaman, it's just having an experience that they never had before, and just being more, have a bigger memory of what life is. It's not about becoming a good person or anything like that at all.
Yes, I would love to be able to bounce off of this. I think that there's like a really big disjunct between like the concept of becoming, which is predominant in the more clerical point of view, which is like the mainstream Christianity. And then you can see the idea of being, the idea that you really never change. You just become more aware of yourself. You don't change as a person. When you take a shaman is a special type of person. The shaman can be identifiable as a child. The shaman will go through a cathartic experience in young adulthood typically, but it can occur even later in life. But the shaman is the shaman because he's the shaman. There's no qualifying experience that he goes through, and you don't graduate into shamanism. You always were. You were selected way before birth. The concept of time is irrelevant to the heterodox practice of spirituality because it has everything to do with time, and that's why it's hard to explain. I'm sure you could be a lot more eloquent about it, but because it is time linked, it is immutable. Or like it is one with the concept of time and of change. It is fatalistic in an absolute sense.
That sounds a lot like the caste system too, in India and elsewhere, is that people are born into certain roles in life and that they can spend their whole life trying to get to the next rung, but they will never be,
Well, the idea of going to the next rung is again a orthodox concept that is it very much is linked to like the more like the mainstream Hindu doctrine of there is one caste that is better than the other, but realistically speaking, all the castes are supposed to work together. And when you look at, for instance, the role of tantric tradition in India, it is often like predilect of the lower castes, because it is a system of technology that does not serve one caste over the other. It is something that selects its chosen people regardless of the caste to which they belong.
Yeah.
You can be
the caste
born...
system is within Sutra, and Tantra is beyond the caste system.
Exactly.
Like it is beyond good and evil, the same thing. And you're absolutely right, Sophia. The shamans live in a world where they can be a child, they can be a god, they can be a grown-up at any given time. They don't go through these phases that the rest of us are forced to do. So they're beyond that. So they live in a state of, I wouldn't say it's beyond time in the traditional sense, but it's because it's a circular world, they can live outside of it and imagine what it's like to be outside of it.
There's a question I wanted to ask to everyone, but also specifically, I'm curious what Sophia and what Alexander think of this. So when we were talking before about us going into the stage of these Wall-E people where we're constantly just being drugged up and just getting entertainment, and to me, that's more of a sign of devolution than evolution. But what's also interesting for me is the idea of there being certain, let's say, powers, for lack of a better word, that people possessed before, and that there are some records, I don't know if these are false or not, of, let's say, certain tribesmen talking about how they would listen to their heart and they would know whether a tribe that went hunting is going to bring back food to them, so they would either prepare a ceremony or not. And I've always been fascinated about what these things are, just as I've been fascinated about the dream state, Kundalini, which I've also been experiencing, just all of these things that people would apply the word supernatural to. But I'm curious where what your take is on a lot of these experiences people would call supernatural. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Well, I don't allow anything supernatural in my philosophy at all, because everything is connected with everything else. So it's within the same nature. And culture is just our human version of adding something to that nature, and it's still natural. So no, it doesn't make any sense to use the word. It's always people who want to escape life. It's always when people go into this mode where they want to escape reality and get away from it and start to mistake mythos for being logos instead of separating mythos and logos. That's where you get these problems. No, if people have capacities like that, and study them for God's sake and try to figure out how they got them. Intuition is fantastically interesting, how it actually operates. But people becoming smarter by having access to less information, meaning there's a certain creativity going on that compensates more than well for the information lost. So all those things are worthy of study, but I don't think it makes any sense to say that there's the natural and then on Bobo that's the supernatural. I can become a little wizard and become Harry Potter because I can do little tricks. I think actually it's the opposite now. I think we are finally moving out of an age of the religion of magic and moving into an age of the religion of technology. This is the whole thesis of the Syntheism book, is that we are finally now realizing that magic was only there to inspire us to create a technology in the future. What was called, telepathy in the past that was dreamed about became the smartphone today. And for good or bad, we now have smartphones and we're going to have them for the rest of existence. That is an event in itself. So after the smartphone arrived, we're going to have to live with smartphones. But that changes the conditions of what it means to be human, because our environment has then radically changed. And that's what I'm interested in. I think we're going to build God. God is not something that created us. God is just the word for the ultimate dream of what we want to build. And in any engineer I talk to say the ultimate dream for an engineer is to build a temple skyscraper or something like that. To be like something that is a temple and reaches to the sky properly. It should be 3 kilometers high and in gold, right? Something like that. That'd be the ultimate engineering construction. And I find that really interesting. I find that ultimately we want to build temples and we want to build God. And that's why I'm interested in the God concept that I put in the future as technology achieved dream.
Well, you're absolutely right that supernatural is not a good word to use here for all these various reasons. But what I'm interested in, though, is this ability to do something that is far beyond our current comprehension. Like I mentioned in that example with the tribe being able to know whether or not the hunting party has succeeded. So if we push that to its limits, how far can we go? That's what I'm interested in.
I'd love
isn't
to try
that like that's like a spooky action at a distance. So like a theory for how that would work is a biological tethering, like a quantum entanglement, which Einstein demonstrated. He coined the term spooky action at a distance. So I've always had a problem with the term supernatural because there's always things outside of our explanation. You can be a caveman making a spear.
Nature is spooky enough anyway, so let's just stay with that.
Have you ever been in the woods at night? If you can't
explain a lightning bolt, is a lightning bolt supernatural just because it's outside of your understanding or explanation? Of course not.
Well, Sophia, you were going to say something, and I'm curious what it was.
Well, I wanted to first say that, I wanted to agree with Alexander about the idea of supernatural. It's implying that we know what is natural and we can differentiate it from the supernatural. I think that the abilities and what we call magic is inherent to who we are as people. When you experience something spectacular, it is natural to you. Again, like the concept, when you look at the shamanic frame for any kind of phenomenon, it's always been there. It is natural. It is as supernatural as drinking water. It is as supernatural as waking up from a nap and looking at the clouds. It's why divination, practically applied, can be used in any circumstance, and you don't need a tarot deck or I Ching set. This is just like part of your experience as a person. And I think that in terms of like what age we're living through the natural progression and collapse of the Orthodox system, in the sense that, not that it's going to collapse permanently, everything is cyclical, but it has ballooned to a certain size. And when you look at the burning of the Notre Dame Cathedral, I think that that's a pretty significant omen for what's happening. And when you have the cathedral of your city burning down, people will flee to the periphery and they'll go back to the old lady who, has a kind of weird look in her eye, but she has a good connection to God and she can give you advice. And that's what we're seeing happening today. That's already what's happening. More and more people, are turning off the TV, picking up their phone and looking on social media. More and more people are disregarding the notion of authority, and they're taking to the streets to have fun with their friends. It's not even about a political statement. It's about connecting with other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. They are. And we call this plurarchy. So to differentiate it from anarchy and not be too afraid of it, but actually see it developing. And plurarchy, essentially, bad word, but we use that one. Plurarchy essentially state where you get nodes. So you get certain people that other people attend to. And these nodes, these personal nodes, tend to be shamanic by character in history. That's where you build from, because the shamans look through whatever else is happening and can then tell you the truth in that case. So the elders, matriarchs, patriarchs, and the shamans are the ones you turn to when the Notre Dame burns down.